Workers who got their bosses fired. How? Management was giving an injured worker shit. Not wanting to pay him. Accusing him of gold bricking. Worker said, "Tell you what. Do the right thing here or you will be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." Worker called the EPA and APCD. Told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation. All because you wanted to FCK with one poor bastard. Edit. Since there may be some question around how all of this could happen in the age of electronic reporting. Here's the story. It's not all the story, of course. The news never does quite get all the story. Since it's in the LA Times, I'm not worried about privacy. However, it was a state agency that was called. The EPA became involved later and at another site. It's been a few years and the chronology of events gets recalled incorrectly sometimes. Once you appear on a regulator's radar, you better have your shit tight. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial sexual abuser of female clients' criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to pay his annual bar fees. But even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over a 6-month period. I used to work at a title company and witness how department manager forged mortgage documents on a fairly regular basis. So when she went to upper management to throw the entire department under the bus for being behind on recording documents, I marched straight to HR to resign and let them know what she was doing. She was fired and they called me and offered my job back before the week was out. For a while I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer just could not be satisfied. No matter how many people, how much attention, how we bent over for them. Our program's director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer, and instead just hammered his employees to do more. People on our team were being let go due to failure or quitting outright due to burnout. And he was bitching that he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as general dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our VP. And this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how so many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later I heard that the director had been let go. And nothing of value was lost. By doing so much, it started an investigation into what they were actually doing during Fire Day. Officially she was fired for sending nudes through corporate email. But the only reason they were tracking her email was to understand what she was spending her time on. Turns out it was an affair. I feel like most people have at least one co-worker who could stand to have their time audited like that. It's a running joke at my job that our 2 supervisors and the manager spend half the day in meetings. The office is too small for that now due to social distancing rules. So the supervisors just wander away every 15 minutes or so to openly stand there and talk to whoever doesn't look too busy. I used to be a store manager at sneaker sporting goods store in the mall. One of my co-managers was F-king one of my underage employees in the back stock room after the store closed on a regular basis. This was going on for several months apparently. I found out when said teenager came to me and she said that my co-manager promised her a raise that she never got. I asked her why he said that he would give her a raise. That is when she told me about the SX in the stock room. I had to call the police and corporate about this. We arranged a sting with help of the girl. As she acted out for the police had to meet up with my co-manager after work. Basically caught him with his pants down, to use a term. Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors open, you get the FCK off the ice. Some dickhead decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss, because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said I feel okay. Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration, because I felt there should be some sort of documentation paper trail in case God forbid I ended up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. The boss was fired by my next shift. I quit because I was sick of her shit. On my way home, the company's president called to talk to me about what had happened. He offered me 2 weeks of paid vacation, extra vacation on top of the 5 weeks I already received, and promised she would be gone when I came back. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one mentorship meeting my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said that I wanted to do back-end work. This was a programming internship. He replied and said, "Girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there." At the time I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought that I would be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened to me, but instead, I was silent because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a couple weeks and I was out to lunch with a few co-workers who brought along a lady who had worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract for a while, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss and some of the stuff he had done or said to them. Mostly just rude things. So I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she'd take care of it. Within a few days he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later and I loved it. Close bracket. As I understand it, I was not the first person to have serious complaints about him. Just the last person. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't. In months. She and my director ordered me and my co-workers to do our own chart audits. Fill out the forms, and they would sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision. Staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us and invariably someone cried due to the stress and lack of support. And not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing in their job. I refused. I was told to do it or I would be fired. Nope. So I got fired. On the way out to my car, I called my former director who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what had happened at that interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of the previous agency. So she called her and I told her everything. 2. Director was fired and supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had killed any chance of promotion and left shortly afterwards. I heard. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Our manager spent her whole shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we so much as stopped to talk to each other she'd come out and yell at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time I left my water bottle at the front counter and my co-worker had to stop her from purposefully throwing it away. She would make up rules on the spot if she didn't like something someone did. I could go on. She was a terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, we all just went to the owners and told them everything and how it made us feel. They got HR involved and got her fired and found out she may have been stealing or giving away product. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if management isn't family. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make sexual comments about threesomes with him. What hotel we picked for our afternoon delight. Shitty like that. It was so bloody uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Problem with supervisor was one of the guys and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted. Told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff. They corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras. Saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking. And was fired. When he was told, he guessed, wasn't hard. That I was the person who complained and tried to get to me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my co-workers surrounding me as he was wailed out. That was a lovely ending to it all. I had a boss who refused to make accommodations for a disabled co-worker. Refused to keep other staff in line and basically let the disabled worker fall behind and get picked on because she, the boss, felt like she was not required to do anything else. I work for a local government agency and reported it to our HR and upper management. After they did nothing, I contacted them again to let them know I would be filing a suit with the ACLU for ADA violations. My boss was gone in 2 weeks and the rest of the staff had mandatory ADA trainings. I used math to prove to their superior how severely my boss had underestimated turnover 3+ years in a row, costing a ton of money and labor issues. One day earlier, the boss had screamed at my team until his face went purple, making a huge spectacle in front of the entire floor. The gist was that we were colluding against the company by a handful of us, electing not to renew our contracts. Came back with graphs and maths. Baby. He was demoted and transferred out a couple weeks later. Pro tip. Don't make a grumpy scapegoat out of someone who loves to make Excel graphs. I had proven myself as a competent management level employee. She, on the other hand, showed favoritism, broke rules, set schedules nobody could work, and all around didn't give a shit as assistant manager. When the manager left, she assumed she was a shoo-in. After all, she was the assistant manager, so why wouldn't she be promoted? We both got called into a meeting. The district uppity up told us both that I was going to be the new manager and she lost her shit. I never saw her again. And quickly after, all her relatives that worked there quit mysteriously. She was hired as a new director. Didn't know much of anything about what she claimed she did. The straw that broke the camel's back was when she stated her boss would sign anything she put in front of him because he didn't know what it was. Oops. She pulled a Red O'Reilly on him. Was the head chef of a small restaurant that I eventually owned before my life collapsed. But that's another story. The owner, who was rarely there, suspected the general manager of stealing. On quiet nights, if she thought she wasn't asking enough on tips, place was small enough that on slow nights it was just the two of us working, she would go to the computer from the manager's screen and delete any tables that were paid in cash, pocketing the money. I got suspicious when my food cost numbers would just never add up to what was being sold. So I got a hold of the software CompuWhy, then ran out computer system. And it turns out they have a backdoor that even the management can't see that logs every single keystroke. Turns out she had ripped off close to $20,000 over a 6-month period. She was asked to leave after that, but for some reason the owner didn't bother to press charges. My mother got this done. She worked for a starting company and her boss really needed her help. Because the boss wanted my father to invest, he owns a couple of companies. My mother would get a job as a second-rank CEO. Right under the women she got fired. In fact, the boss kept treating her like shit, so she told my father. My father told the other investors and all 3 of them cancelled the deal. They set up the same kind of company with my mom as only CEO. All people who worked for that former boss left and began working at the new company. I worked in a bar and I caught my supervisor giving her and her friends free drinks and taking bottles home. They reviewed the CCTV and found she was also dealing drugs from behind the bar, and she was fired the next day. I had a boss who was skimming off employee hours at Walmart. I took screenshots of my employees' hours on Thursday before the shift started and then screenshots of their hours on Friday that showed that all of them had a couple hours skimmed off their work week. I was a low-level manager, he was an upper-tier manager. He got fired. I believe his motivations was that he wanted to get promoted and wanted to show that he could get more done in less man hours. Probably would have impacted his bonus too. Not my manager. But I got a project manager who worked with my team fired when it was obvious he didn't understand the business domain and put no work into understanding it or even breaking down the problems with the team. During a stakeholder meeting, we were asked about the game plan for tackling the project. He spewed some nonsense. And I asked what the actual plan was in detail. When he tried to come up with BS to explain that the problem is very complex and there is no clear path to building the project. That sealed his fate. I told supervisors that my direct boss was stealing so much product and time from the store. I knew it. Her stories didn't add up. She was never helping us on the floor. Always in her office. Would take 5 hours lunch breaks and not clock out. Leave early. Tell me she was coming in early when the store didn't open until 9, which I knew was shitty because she didn't have a store key. I told them for about 8 months. No one followed up on it. I didn't get her fired. Per se. But I basically made her unable to get rehired or not able to use us as a reference. I got promoted to her position after she left. And I found thousands of dollars worth of empty boxes shoved in the back of her desk drawers. I'm sure she was taking cash from the register. 2. Pose. I worked for a pharma company and my supervisor was always a DCK to me. On one of my annual reviews, he put that I had changed the parameters on one of our pieces of equipment so that it was out of spec. It's a lot more complicated. But I refused to sign my review and basically proved that it didn't happen. Now, everything was documented there including our reviews, and him submitting false information on my review was a fireable offense. I ended up quitting right after I got him fired because basically everyone there was shitty like that. I can't take credit for getting him fired. But I have a good story. My former manager was a bloody moron. None of my co-workers liked him. He was rude, a bully, and didn't know what he was doing. I made an hour complaint a few months after starting there, so I feel like I helped build a case at least. Found out from long-term workers that he had many reports on his file already for various things, including harassment. One day, we were just told he wouldn't be back. He was there the day prior. The complaint that finally got him fired didn't come from me. But you'll love-hate this. In February he was casually speaking with a Chinese employee about coronavirus. And the manager referred to COVID-19 as Kung Flu. Employee complained and asked for apology. The manager refused to even apologize, saying he, employee, could quit if he didn't want to work for him. Employee quit. And the manager was fired. After several years at the company. FCK that guy. I work for the federal government and we have a yearly review for all employees to fill out where you can rank your management. Enough people complained that it caught someone's attention and they sent an auditors to investigate. Our boss was incompetent and cost us necessary funding because they simply weren't doing their job. What got them fired in the end though was time fraud. Auditors found it when doing the general investigation about the complaint. Time fraud was working in a mixed civilian military building. One of the very senior managers died. The really senior managers went in his office to figure out what needed to be done and found a bottle and a deck of cards in his desk. Nothing else. Turned out his secretary had been doing all his work for years. Guess who got promoted? My boss had been with the company for around 25 years and was getting very complacent. He would show up around 9 AM. Leave for lunch about 11:30. Get back around 1:30 and then sometimes leave by 2 or 3 PM for the day. It's not like no one noticed this behavior. But they wanted to put him in a position where there was a spotlight on him so he could either get with the program or they would get rid of him. So I was transferred out of that department because I was the one who was doing all the work. Anyway, a year later, the situation didn't improve. So they let him go and gave me his job. Don't get me wrong. I didn't get him fired. He did that all by himself. But I knew what the plan was and I didn't share the details with him because I knew how much he made and I wanted the promotion and raise to go along with it. He confided in me that he was banging a staff member. Told me he would stop. About a year later. He's still doing it and everyone pretty much knows. He keeps promoting her. I sent in a few anonymous tips to HR. Which led to a few investigations and ultimately his dismissal. Was honest about why my work was behind, accounts were going down the crapper. I was escalating things to him and he wasn't doing anything. They weren't fired. But they volunteered to be demoted to a non-managerial position. Every person in my department filed multiple complaints about our incompetent director. CEO finally got the message it would be cheaper and easier to fire and replace him than it would be to fire and replace all 50 of us. Unfortunately, the guy that replaced the shitty former director was not an improvement, so I found a better job and quit. My current boss is awesome. Manager, 33M, at popular video game store, sexually harassed every female. Teenage employee. After months I finally reported it. He was fired, but the way they fired him let him collect unemployment. And got hired somewhere else as a manager soon after because the reason he was fired was never disclosed and they made all of us sign NDAs. I was young and dumb at the time and needed a paycheck and was told I couldn't go back to work until I signed the paperwork. So basically he got fired and made out fine and probably harassed girls at his new management job. Made copies of financial records the drunk heifer was falsifying and giving her two favorite office girls extra time. Fake overtime. Paying them to go on marketing campaigns that were really getting their nails and hair done together on company money while promoting competitor businesses who she was sleeping with. Their owner's corporate walked in and gave her 30 minutes to vacate the building. I wasn't there when it happened, but I hear she was crying. Makeup all fucked up. Bitching that she paid for the employee bathroom remodel. They said that was her personal decision. Those that were there tell me it was glorious to see her booted out. I wasn't the only employee who submitted stuff to corporate. They ended up taking her to court and her little crony chicks too. They all ended up working at a thrift store as cashiers. It was beautiful karma justice. So one day, my boss told me to step in his office for accidentally sleeping on the job. His wife called him during his lecturing. However, and he left the office for a bit. I was alone in the room. Now, I waited for 5 minutes until I decided to look at his computer when I saw busty college girls in his bookmarks. I took a photo and showed human resources. The next day he was packing his stuff and I got off easy. Although after that I never slept on the job again. F in the chat for my previous boss. My guy is just trying to look at some busty college girls. I don't want to go too deep into it, but basically my boss got into a yelling match with a customer who was correct about some handicap seat laws. I worked at a movie theater. My boss was dead wrong about it and we all knew it, so I wrote down some contact info to his boss. Told the guy my boss's name. A few weeks later my boss was cleaning out his office. Which was when I quit. As the new management was a woman who had never worked in a movie theater before and we were always busy, so she forgot a ton of vital stuff. My boss at a former company where I worked sent me an email where he said he wanted to terminate some people to make room for some regular employees. The list of people to be fired were all minorities. I forwarded the email to the proper authorities and they began an investigation which ultimately led to the boss getting fired. Arsehole deserved it. Worked at a caregiving company. Boss showed up on my shift drunk to flirt with my co-worker that was 20 years younger than her. Reported her to HR. Over the course of my apprenticeship I wrote down about half of the major harassment events. Our company was bought by a company which hired a real HR department. So the week I turned journeyman I told HR. I must be put on the opposite shift of this man for these reasons as it's affecting my mental well-being. HR opened an official investigation and I handed them 13 pages of events, reviews, and complaints, all date stamped with emails. In one safety meeting, the general manager of the site shook my supervisor's hand and said, "You're a long way from home." My supervisor was a South African white male. The next set he was fired. If I had wrote down every harassment episode, there would have been a full book. I've learned now to write down everything inappropriate that happens at the workplace, because in the end you will always wish you had. She tried to embezzle $15 million from a multinational, right? I was the local auditor. When I saw what this idiot was doing, I forwarded the records to corporate and to the local PD. Fired. Charged. Arrested. I imagine this isn't even uncommon. Not manager, but a senior ranking colleague. I didn't report him, but know the colleague who reported him. Let's just say that if you are going to call your female boss a cunt and that you'd like to punch her, do it privately and not in an open office environment around a lot of other women. Manager buttered me up while I was 17 so I could see him as a great friend. He was gay, but I had no issue with it. I turned 18 and I asked him, how exactly can I break the news to my parents that I am bi? They are super Christian, and he helped me out. He then added me on Facebook. Okay, that's not weird. I had a few co-workers added on Facebook and IG just from suggestions. He then starts messaging me and it was normal messages, but then he sent me a pic of him in a Speedo. Okay, that's weird. But then he started asking me questions like, have you ever been with a guy? And the like. Reported him the next morning and my boss came in 30 minutes later to say, by the way, he was fired. You don't have to worry. Good riddance. Wasn't really me, by my co-worker caught our boss lifting our code base and reusing it to complete work for personal clients. Even after he was caught, he almost kept his job. In my experience, the person who hired your boss does not want to admit it was a bad hire and will support them to the point of ridiculousness. Plus there is frequently a vibe in management of us versus them, and complaints from non-management just become background noise.